Good morning. Today's lesson is on the distributive property. So go ahead and at the top of the page, the next available page in your math notebook, write the distributive property. Okay, that's what today's lesson is on, the distributive property. Now, remember that a property in math is kind of like a rule or law that numbers always follow. And let's start off with some notes. The distributive property, you can just write DP since we already wrote it at the top. We'll know that DP stands for distributive property. The distributive property is where you multiply each addend by a number and then add the products. Now, the distributive property is one of those things in math where the definition is a little bit confusing, and the easiest way to understand it is actually just to see examples of it. If you're anything like me, you don't find this definition especially helpful. That is the definition for the distributive property, but when I read that, if that's all I had, I still wouldn't really understand what the distributive property was. It's kind of hard to understand when you just see the definition, but when you see examples of it, it's a little bit easier. So let's just start by showing some examples of the distributive property in action. Let's say we had 3 times 42. Now, of course, we could solve this the normal way just by stacking it, 42 times 3. And we could just multiply the ones place on bottom by the ones place on top. 3 times 2 is 6. Then we'd multiply the ones place on bottom by the tens place on top. 3 times 4 is 12. So it's 126. Okay? That's the normal way to solve 42 times 3. But you can also use the distributive property. And here's basically what the distributive property means. It means you can separate or distribute the number into different parts, multiply it separately, and then add it all together in the end. So let me show you what that looks like. We can separate 42 into 40 and 2. And we can multiply 3 by 40 and 2 separately. And then, if we add what the two products are, we'll get the same answer as 126. Watch. 3 times 4 is 12, and then we add the 0. We learned that a couple lessons ago, that when you're dealing with zeros, you can just multiply without the 0 and then plop the 0 down in the final product. So 3 times 4 is 12. There's 1 0 in both factors, so we put it down in the product. 3 times 40 is 120. 3 times 2 is 6. Now we drop down this plus sign. We have 120 plus 6, and it equals 126. Okay, that is the distributive property in action. It's just a different way of finding the same answer. Here's another way of showing the distributive property. I like this second way. It's a pictorial way to show the distributive property. Instead of using an expression like this, it does it in a picture or like in a box. It's actually more of a rectangle. So make a rectangle and split it into 2 parts, one large part and one small part. The large part we're going to have represent 40, and the small part we're going to have represent the 2. So it represents 42, a big number and a small number. 40 plus 2 is 42. And now we put 3 on the side. And now 3 times 40 is 120. 3 times 2 is 6. And then we just add together whatever is inside the box. 120 plus 6 is 126. So that's another way of showing the distributive property. I like this way. It's a little less confusing than showing it as an expression, but both ways are important to know. Let's do another example. Let's say we have 5 times 18. Let's start with the box way this time. It's actually called using an area model. So let's start with the area model. We make a rectangle, split it into 2 parts, one big and one small, and we separate 18 into 2 parts. And if we did that with 18, the 1 represents 10 because it's in the tens place, and the 8 is in the ones place, what represents 8. So now instead of having 18, we have 10 and 8, but it's the same thing. 10 plus 8 is 18. Now, the number we're multiplying it by goes on the 5. Now we just multiply them separately. 5 times 10 is 50, and 5 times 8 is 40. Notice if we want to use the expression way with the parentheses and stuff, it's pretty easy to go from this to that. Look, we have 5 times 10, so that's 5 times 10 in parentheses, plus 5 times 8. Oh, you can't really see it. 5 times 8 in parentheses. Okay, now 5 times 10 is 50, and 5 times 8 is 40, and 50 plus 40 is 90. That's another example of the distributive property. Let's do one more example before we move on to the guided practice. Okay, let's say we have 2 times 21. Let's start with the way of writing it as an expression first this time. We'd separate 21 into 20 and 1. So we'd do 2 times 20 in parentheses plus 2 times 1. See how the 2 distributes to the 20 and the 1. That's why it's called the distributive property. You distribute the 2 into both parts. So 2 times 1. Okay, and the 21 also distributes into 20 and 1. So it's kind of like 2 numbers being distributed. Now, 2 times 20 is 40, because 2 times 2 is 4, and then the 0 just falls down into the product, and 2 times 1 is 2, and then 40 plus 2 is 42. Let's also show this way using the Let's also show this one using the area model. We make a rectangle, split it into one larger part and one smaller part. The larger part represents the 20, the smaller part represents the 1 in 21. And then we put the 2 on the side. 2 times 20 is 40, 2 times 1 is 2, 40 plus 2 is 42. Let's do your guided practice now. Okay, go ahead. If you need to turn the page, go ahead, and on the top write guided practice. And here are the 3 guided practice problems. 3 times 52, 5 times 26, and 7 times 23. Now, if you're feeling confident about how to do this, go ahead and pause the video and try to do these independently, and then restart the video, and I will do them with you so you can see if you got them correct. Okay, if you're feeling confident, you just paused the video, you did these 3 problems, and then you pressed play, and now let's work them out. We would separate 52 into 50 and 2. Then we distribute the 3 into each of those 2 numbers. And we multiply it separately and then add the 2 products together. So 3 times 50 is, well, 3 times 5 is 15, and then we add the 0 into the answer, and 3 times 2 is 6. So 3 times 52 is 150 plus 6 is 156. And if you wanted to show that same problem using the area model, you separate the 52 into 50 and 2. You multiply both by 3 separately. 3 times 50 is 150 3 times 2 is 6, and 150 plus 6 is 156. Now 5 times 26. Okay, let's start with the area model this time. We separate 26 into 20 and 6. We distribute the 5 to be multiplied by each one separately. 5 times 20 is 100, because 5 times 2 is 10, and then we add the 0 from the factor into the product. 5 times 6 is 30, and 100 plus 30 is 130. And if we want to show that as an expression, we separate 26 into 20 and 6. We distribute the 5 to each one, multiply it separately, and then add the products at the end. 5 times 20 is 100. 5 times 6 is 30. 100 plus 30 is 130. Now 7 times 23. We separate the 23 into 20 and 3. Then we distribute the 7 to multiply it by each one separately. That's basically, in a nutshell, what the distributive property is, that you can distribute one of the factors to be multiplied by the separate parts of the second factor separately, and then you can add the two products together at the end, and you get the same answer that you would have if you would have just multiplied 7 times 23 in the first place. 7 times 2 is 14. Take the 0 from the factors, add it into the product. 7 times 3 is 21. Now 140 plus 21 is 161. See? 140 plus 21. 0 plus 1 is 1. 4 plus 2 is 6. 1 plus nothing is 1. 161. Okay, and this video's getting a little long, so we'll skip the area model way of solving it on 7 times 23. Now I'd like you to write down your independent practice. Go ahead and write independent practice. And I want you to independently solve 2 times 45. I want you to solve 4 times 56. And I want you to solve 6 times 24. And I want you to solve these 3 problems using the distributive property. After you've finished that, click on the next video to see if you got them right. All right, catch you guys next time. Signing off.